Hello again, Squid School students, and welcome back to Map Mode of the Day. I was really happy with the feedback that I got on the first edition of this that I made with Goby Clams, and so we're going to keep the series going. What I've decided to do is to decide which map mode I do on a given day by polling my patrons on Patreon. So if you would like to have input on which map mode I decide to cover on a given day, then you can check out the link in the description to find my Patreon page. I really appreciate the support because I am trying to do this professionally, and the financial support specifically that comes from that site is going to be instrumental in making it so that I can continue to do this for as long as I want to. So, would really appreciate that. With that out of the way, let's get started by talking about the objective line on this map. Remember, the objective line is the line that your team overall has to push along in order to get to the enemy team's basket and score. Now, the objective line on this map mode is deceptively simple. It's just a straight line across the middle of the map. What makes this a little bit more interesting theoretically, though, is when you start thinking about how you control space along this line. If I'm just right here, if I'm right at my own basket, the radius of space around me that I have to control is relatively small. There's not too much of an area around me that I need to control to be safe on this location. But the further forward I walk, the more of the map my team needs to control in order to have safety on that location. The middle of this map is one of the most unsafe positions in all of Splatoon 2. This spot right here is just a no man's land. Nobody wants to be on that spot. Somebody could be sharking on either side conveyor, and they could be sharking at any point. Maybe they're here. Maybe they're here. Maybe they're here. Maybe they're here or here. And that's just on the conveyors. You can also come around the conveyors in either side. You can come around these pillows from either side. You can attack from this location or this location. Mid is extremely, extremely unsafe. And so one of the big challenges of this map is how do we get control of mid strongly enough that we are able to actually stage a push on the enemy basket. One other factor that makes this map really, really interesting is the location of the spawns. On the previous map mode that we talked about, the spawn was basically just right behind the basket, and pushing past the basket was a way to control the enemy spawn. But the spawn locations are not here on this map. They're all the way up here and all the way down here. They're sideways from where the basket is. And what's more, you have access from your spawn to this location right here. Dropping down from here gives you access to the back third of your opponent's objective line. So rather than having to just brute force your way in from the front, like you would have to on some maps, on this map you can actually very effectively flank the enemy team even if they have control of the objective and are scoring. What you'll see a lot of players do, a very common mistake on this map, is they'll spawn out from here or they'll spawn out from here, and everybody tries to just push the baskets in this direction to defend and clear people out. What you should really be doing every time you play defense is have someone drop all the way out here and flank around from behind. The impact of this is huge because, for one thing, it's always better to be making your opponents fight a two-front war, and now you're pinching them between these two angles. But what this is really important for clearing is this tiny little piece of cover right here. This little tiny piece of cover is a huge pain in the butt for the defending team. There is no position here or here that gives you really good control over this piece of cover unless maybe you've got a bunch of bombs to throw or you're using an explosher or something. Straight line of sight does not clear this area out. People can score safely behind cover from behind this location. And this is also a great location for an enemy backliner to be right side peeking you. In order to clear this out, what we need to be able to do is either push in from this direction or somehow push from this direction, which is really unlikely. And the way that you get a push from this direction is by coming out this way. So this is really the best way to clear out the enemy team on defense. Unfortunately, what that does tend to mean on defense is that you are going to have to allow the opposing team to throw in all of the clams that they took into your base here. This is a very high-scoring map. If you are able to get control of this much of the map right here, your team is going to be able to score almost all the way down to KO before they have to go back and get clams a lot of the time. But a lot of the time, the best way to stop that push is simply by quarantining the other team, by keeping them cooped up in this area, not allowing them to rotate back into mid to gather clams again. At that point in time, you will typically force opponents either to run off in these directions or just splat the opponents entirely and force a team wipe and be able to use that time to at least get control of maybe this much of the map. If you can at least do that much, then you have staged a successful defense. Let's talk about individual weapon roles and how they will play around these more macro concepts. Again, as the Slayer and Skirmisher, we're going to be saying this every time, your job, your entire job, your whole role on the team is to take wherever your point is on the objective line, wherever your team is pushed up to, and push that point even further to get that further forward, closer to the enemy goal. So on defense, that's relatively simple. You just have to secure this much space, push them away from the basket far enough that they're out of your hair. But then once you enter the neutral game, it gets a lot more complicated because you have this entire area that you ideally want to fully control in order to be able to push your point to here on the objective line. In order to do this, typically you're going to have to pair up with your teammates and have a couple people push around the conveyors at the same time to clear them out. So depending on where the opponents are, depending on where they're threatening from, you may want to go in here on the left-hand side or in here on the right-hand side. Now, you don't necessarily need to push two people along in the same direction. In fact, if these two players here are just here right on top of each other, the one player here stands a pretty good chance of mowing them down, especially if they got better range. So what can sometimes be a better play is to have one player go here, and then to have one very quickly, very stealthily, sneak right along the edge here, keeping as much cover underneath the wall here as they possibly can so that these players don't get line of sight on them earlier, so that players from this side have a harder time spotting them or hitting them, and pinch an opponent who's here between the two of them. Because in this location, this player can't jump out, nor can they retreat, and so now they're stuck. And that can be a really, really good set play between a Skirmisher and a Slayer. So that's a good way to clear out the conveyors here. But always be making sure you know where the opponents are stacking. Because if they have 3 players on this conveyor and you try to do that play, the Skirmisher is probably going to die, and then the Slayer is going to die afterwards as soon as they get around the corner. So you need to make sure that you know you actually have a numbers advantage before you go for a play like that. One way that you can, of course, clear these is using specials. So for example, if you were to launch missiles on the 2 players here, you'd have missiles landing here, you'd have missiles landing here. That will force the opponents to either go this way or to go this way. And either way, you're going to be able to meet those players and hopefully take them out because they're forced to run before they can act again. Once you have control of mid and you're starting to try and make a push into the basket, your job as the Slayer is not necessarily to spend a ton of time scoring. If you have clams and the basket is open and nobody else is scoring at this point in time, yes, occasionally throw a clam in to try and keep the basket open. But the goal is always to keep the basket open, not to score as much as you possibly can all at once. If you can keep the basket open, you will have the opportunity to KO. If you don't let the basket stay open, then it doesn't really matter that much that you have control of this space anymore. You're going to be forced to back up to get more clams and stage a push anyway. And you want your team forward on the objective line for as long as possible. So your goal is just to keep this basket open for as long as you can, to force your opponents to focus on this area, to force your opponents to not focus on making a push like this and retaking control of mid or anything like that, because mid is not what's important to them, it's keeping their basket closed. Typically, what you're going to do is take a position maybe here, someplace unpredictable, maybe here. Maybe you work a little bit around this area, or maybe you're sharking here and waiting for someone to come out this way. Maybe you go and collect some clams from this location and come back this way to catch these players as they rotate in. Those are all some options that you've got. You want to be a little bit unpredictable, and you want to use cover, and you've got a lot of options for doing that around this area. Just know that the main threats are going to come from this location, from here, and from here. And so you're trying to figure out, when someone comes out, where can I be that I can take those players out from those positions? You want to keep the basket open for as long as possible, but eventually it's probably going to close. When it does close, you have two options. You can either back up and just try to keep your zone established over here, or, especially for skirmisher weapons, what you can also do is go this way, or drop off this wall. What this does is it doesn't really put you at that valuable a strategic position a lot of the time. If you are right here and nobody's addressing you, you could continue to theoretically throw clams in the basket until they run all the way backwards to try and deal with you. But let's say that the basket is closed. You still might have reason to stay around in this area, because while this is not an advantageous position to control at all, you have no height advantage whatsoever, and there aren't that many clams that spawn here, being there, you're still a little bit of a threat. You could still come up from behind someone and flank. You could let your team jump power clams in or something like that. The opposing team does need to deal with you. And you can waste the heck out of their time if you're a brush and you're just running like, woo, look at me, I'm doing circles, woo, woo, ha ha ha, you can't catch me. And you can just waste their time like a crazy person out here. And their time means that your team has the time to get to this position and maybe start pushing this zone further forward while you're keeping the other team bottled up looking this way. Doing this allows the other three members of your team to get a better control of mid and push that forward, so that by the time you are actually cleared out and you're forced to eventually jump, because that is what you should eventually do. If you're right here and you're pinned, just jump back to spawn. Or better yet, jump back to a teammate who's maybe over here. But you'll probably, if you're locked down over here, you'll probably have at least two opponents, often three, looking in this direction. And those opponents are only maybe back here on the objective line that entire time. They're not able to ever push their point any further forward because you were wasting their time over here. And so that is the impact that a skirmisher can have on this map. It's really, really annoying to have something like a brush or a CDS or something that's really able to play this area well. Something that those kinds of players should keep in mind is that you have access to this area without having to push in the front door by using the rail that's on this location. Now, this is a very visible rail. Anybody who is defending from right here will very easily be able to see that rail spawning, and longer range weapons might actually just try and shoot you straight off the rail, depending on how quickly you're able to get over there. So you've got to time your run pretty carefully. But if you are able to get down here and start using the wall here for cover, start maybe using the lack of line of sight on this conveyor, you can really be a huge nuisance to them and facilitate either a push or regaining control of mid by making a play like that. Supports. Remember, we said that the Slayer and Skirmisher's job is not so much to throw clams in as it is to keep the objective line pushed forward. You, the support, it is your job to throw clams in. Your job is to have as many clams as you possibly can at all times, and to either be throwing them to your teammates from mid as you run around here and collect them, and then maybe you just chuck them to someone who's sitting here, or come in and score them yourself. And in the meantime, to be painting around this area and gaining control of it. The most common locations you're going to find clams are going to be here, here, and maybe a little bit in mid. But usually it's one of these two locations. And so your team is going to need somebody, once they run out of all of the clams to score, to run back to those locations and collect those clams and bring them back to the basket. And so that's what you do. If you're collecting clams here, you do have to be careful about someone dropping down this way. This is a dangerous defensive option, and if somebody gets the drop on you, that can end a push really quickly. Pushing back here to grab clams can be more reliable just because it's easier to defend, but also if the opposing team pushes in either from this direction or from this direction, they do stand a chance of potentially walling you off and cutting you off from the basket. So you have to kind of pick your spots carefully. Generally, just go where the clams are, try to get the clams back to the basket. And it's ideal, not that this is going to happen every time, but it's ideal for you to be the one to score more clams or deal more with clams than your teammates do. Because your weapon is designed to paint well, which means it probably has really bad aim RNG, because bad aim RNG makes it so that it paints more. And you're also usually a shorter range weapon, especially if you're something like an NZAP or a junior. So your longer range weapons, your slayers, your skirmishers, they're better suited to taking fights with someone who's taking a position up here or here, with someone who's trying to work their way out of here. Your longer ranged weapons, your better slaying weapons, they should focus on keeping those guys back. Your focus should be on keeping the basket open at all costs, whether that means by throwing clams into a backliner who's at this position, by scoring them yourself, by throwing them to slayers who are in corners where it's difficult for players to shoot down at. Whatever it is that you can do to keep that basket open, that is your primary goal. You're the objective player more than anybody else is, and if you can keep that steady stream of clams going to keep this basket open, this is absolutely a map where you can 0 to 100 KO the other team. Anchors. Your job is to keep this from shifting backwards too far when things aren't going well, or when your slayers go down, or if somebody's pushing your slayer. So for example, if you have a player right here who's maybe sharking with a roller and trying to get picks, if you stand in this position, even if this guy gets double teamed from here and maybe from here, if you can apply pressure to keep this player safe, your team gets to keep this where it is. So your goal is to have an impact, and by that I mean to impact the team's positioning on the map from whatever position you're able to take that gives you range over what's important at that time. Holding conveyors is really nice. Charger players love to play from up here, especially when there's not an opposing charger player to threaten them, because this just gives them so much view over so much of the map. They can see so much from there. They also like to take positions like these or these because they have unattainable high ground. They like to take this position on defense because from this position, you have line of sight on anybody who could possibly push you. If somebody tries to take the rail, well, you just snipe them off the rail. If somebody tries to push from here, the only cover they have is this little pillow right here. If somebody tries to push from here, only cover they have is this pillow right here. You've got access to all of the map in front of you that you really need to worry about at that point on the objective line, and so this position is really, really strong. But you can also take a position up here if you're still a little threatened, or a position up here to try and clear players that are maybe pushing for this piece of cover that we mentioned before. We've already mentioned a little bit about key positions to control, but let's talk about those positions really quickly. Again, this piece of cover right here, absolutely brutal. If your opposing team has a player right here, nobody on this position, nobody on this position can contest them. And those are the safest positions to come out of spawn from. Yeah, maybe if you're able to get all the way out from here and do this, you're safe, but this conveyor is really, really unsafe to push out of. I highly recommend not going out of here very often, because the conveyor is going to be pushing you forward in this direction, and so that's going to get you stuck right around here, And if there happens to be an opponent that like walks around the corner at you and sees, now you're stuck, because now you can't retreat as fast as they can advance. You also don't have a ton of cover, especially trying to clear out of this area right here. The best you've got is this sponge, and if they just paint the sponge, you can't get up over the top, and eventually they throw a bomb behind you. So this is a really inconsistent place to come out from. Again, one of the only ways to flush this location is by putting someone out all the way on the far right-hand side of the map and coming all the way around this way. So that's not ideal. Try to control this as soon as you possibly can once you're trying to get a push started, and as long as you have pressure from this direction and somebody over here, you're probably in a good enough position to control this spot, because you can probably control the opponents. You can flush them out here for this player to look at. You've got a pinch going that way. So that is an extremely key position to control. Another very key position to control is the conveyor. Both conveyors are very strategically important. Yours is especially useful because you have this unlimited access to it from your spawn. So as long as you can keep control of this, you will always have access to mid. But controlling the opponent's spawn conveyor is really good too, because this gives you flank routes on mid. This is the area you're more likely to be able to control, but if you can flush this out really quickly and put a player into mid, you can often flush out this piece of cover or come up behind somebody and pinch them here, and really just take complete control of mid using that flank route around the side here. But you also have to be very careful if you're pushing in this direction, whatever weapon you're using, that there's not someone above you about to drop down on you that you can't see, that there is not someone hiding right on the side of it. So someone can sit right here and you right peek over the side, over the edge. With right peek advantage, you can see around the right side of walls earlier than you can see around the left side of walls. Well, the way that that translates on a ramp is that this player can shoot over the top of the ramp before this player can. Because this player is trying to left side peek while holding the weapon on the right-hand side, whereas this player is holding the weapon on the right-hand side and trying to right-side peek. So there is a bit of a defender's advantage there. You've got to watch out for a weapon like a Nautilus in this position. It's absolutely brutal to run into a Nautilus or something, or an H3, something with decently long weapon range, if you're trying to push around the side like this and they see you coming. It's a little bit of a weak side play. It's a scary flank to go for, but it is something that can pay huge dividends if you can eventually get around to this position and start controlling this area, because that really cuts the opposing team off. That really pushes them back to like here on the objective line. So, main goals. We'll start on defense and work our way forward. On defense, remember your goal is to get somebody out on this side and somebody watching from here so that you can clear out the basket, at least this area right here. Your secondary objective is if any skirmishers decide to drop back here for the enemy team, to clear those out as quickly and efficiently as possible, using as few resources as possible and surrendering as little time and as little space in the middle of the map to get it. Then, once you've got this whole area clear, your goal is to secure mid. Usually you're going to control one side's conveyor and then start pushing the other side using the one conveyor as a staging ground. And then once you have control of both conveyors, what you're going to try and do is use especially the right conveyor, but also this pillow over here, to start staging a special push to completely crush in on your opponents and get control of the enemy basket. Once you have control of the enemy basket, your goal is, like I said, to maintain the basket being open for as long as possible so that you can go for that 0 to KO push. Your goal is to have your slayers and skirmishers wall out the enemy team from being able to come in from these directions. Have maybe an anchor positioned right here to get a special control over these positions. And then to have your support and maybe a slayer here and there, or a skirmisher, coming back out into this area of mid to collect the clams that are closest to the basket and bring them back to either throw them to other teammates to score or to score themselves. If your push ends, again, your goal is to waste their time as much as possible and keep them pushed as far forward on the objective line as you can. And one of the ways to do that is by skirmishing down here One of the ways to do that is when you spawn in after getting splatted, to try and take more advanced positions and try to keep paint down in this area of the map to make it more difficult for the opponents to drop out, and to keep this arc pushed as far forward as you can if you still have enough of an advantage to do so. As always, if you don't have enough of an advantage to do so, the correct answer is always to give up space rather than go down. Because if you give up space by running backwards to maybe here, where it's a little safer, the objective line gets pushed back to here. If you get splatted and you have no control of the map whatsoever, your objective line is going to get pushed back more to something like this. So as long as you keep yourself alive, you are still applying pressure. You are still keeping the objective line further forward. Even if you're running with your tail between your legs, even if you feel like you're playing like a coward, you're probably still keeping the objective line pushed further forward by running away than you are if you stay in and get yourself taken out of play completely. Especially because that prevents you from getting special charge, and special charge will let you immediately start a counter push from back here where you retreated to that forces the objective line right back to where it was in the first place. That's my take on Piranha Pit Clam Blitz. Hopefully you learned something from it. Again, let me know if you have any feedback about the format, because this is a relatively new project. I'm happy to add things, subtract things, do whatever it is that it takes for this to be as useful as possible to people. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please consider supporting again on the Patreon, or at least by giving a like and subscribing to the channel. And we'll see you for the next one.